There's been a noticeable trend in the Disney parks lately, and I'm not talking about the number of adults fighting over exclusive popcorn buckets or pins. Attractions are getting safer. Older rides are being toned down, intense moments are disappearing, and new attractions often feel designed to be as universally family friendly as possible. Instead of building tension or telling a dramatic story, many modern rides feel like a bright, overstimulating tour through a familiar IP. And in the process, Disney might be losing something important. Because for a long time, some Disney attractions were actually kind of scary. Not horror movie scary, but scary enough to challenge kids. And that fear was part of what made the parks magical. One of the most famous examples of this is an attraction I never even got to experience: Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter. Originally, Disney had an even darker idea. The attraction was going to be themed to Ridley Scott's Alien. The ride would feature the xenomorph and be called Nostromo, after the ship in the movie. The concept reportedly came from Michael Eisner, who was trying to bring more thrills into the parks for teenagers. But there was one problem: Alien was rated R. And at the time, Disney had a general rule that attractions based on existing IP should come from G or PG movies. So, the Alien idea was scrapped. Instead, George Lucas helped create Alien Encounter using original characters. The attraction soft launched in December of 1994, but it didn't officially open until June of 1995. The attraction soft launched in December of 1994, but it didn't officially open until June of 1995. Why? Because even Disney realized pretty quickly it was too scary. Guests sat in a theater while a teleportation experiment went wrong, unleashing a hostile alien into the room. The lights went out. You could hear the creature moving around you. The restraints locked you into your seat. Disney even used in theater effects to sell the illusion. And people still talk about it to this day. But by 2003, Disney decided the ride was simply too much, so it closed. The replacement tells you everything about the shift Disney was beginning to make. In 2004, the attraction reopened as Stitch's Great Escape. Same theater, same ride system, but instead of a terrifying alien, the loose creature in the room was Stitch. The horror was replaced with slapstick comedy. Most guests remember the infamous moment where Stitch steals a guest's chili cheese dog, burps, and then the theater fills with the smell. It was less terrifying and more silly, but as a kid, it was still scary even though I loved Stitch. I would have been about 5 or 6 years old when it opened. The lights still went out, you still heard the alien moving around you, and when you're a kid sitting in a dark room strapped to a chair, your imagination does the rest. Finishing that show felt like an accomplishment, but even that toned down version didn't last forever. After years of operating seasonally, Stitch's Great Escape closed in 2018. The building has sat empty to this day. There were rumors that the show would be replaced with a Wreck-It Ralph show, utilizing the same ride system, but those rumors have since died down. But if you're noticing a pattern here, you're not alone. A very scary attraction becomes a mildly scary attraction and eventually disappears altogether. Another show that terrified me as a kid was It's Tough to Be a Bug at Animal Kingdom. This show featured spiders dropping from the ceiling with red lighting filling the room. This was obviously a frightening moment. But the real nightmare came at the end. Flick would ask guests to stay seated while the insects exited the theater. Then, suddenly, something moved under your seat. A wheel under the chairs would rotate, creating the sensation of bugs crawling underneath you. Kids would lose it, crying, screaming, trying to escape. I never survived this show. My grandma and I had an understanding. Whenever my family went to see It's Tough to Be a Bug, we would go do something else. Even when my family went on a trip with family friends in 5th grade, I had to run out halfway through the show when the spiders dropped. But in 2023, I went back to Animal Kingdom with a friend. By that point, it had already been announced that the show was closing to make way for a Zootopia retheme that at the time I was excited for. So, I had one goal: I had to beat it. At 24 years old, I finally made it through the entire show. The show has since reopened with the Zootopia retheme, and it's probably the worst thing Disney has put out in the last 10 years or so. But that's a story for another video. Another attraction that played a big role in my childhood fear at Disney still exists today: Tower of Terror. This ride was another huge accomplishment for me. I don't actually remember my first time riding it, but my parents loved telling the story. Apparently, the first time I rode it, I spent the entire ride screaming that I hated them and that they had tricked me. They had told me that the ride was just as scary as Snow White's Scary Adventures, which led me to believe it was just like a dark ride, like the Haunted Mansion. It was not. The next trip we took, I thought I was going to be brave enough to ride it. But when we got to the front of the line, I chickened out and had to go down the service elevator with my grandma. And honestly, this might be my most cherished Disney memory from my childhood. I remember my grandma telling me it was okay if I didn't want to go on it. Then, once we were in the elevator with the cast member, she admitted something to me. She had been hoping I would chicken out, because she didn't want to ride it either. Now that I'm older, these are the moments I remember the most from going to Disney as a kid. I don't remember meeting Mickey for the first time. I don't remember getting a high score on Buzz Lightyear or Toy Story Mania. But I do remember going down Summit Plummet at 5 or 6 years old when I was barely tall enough to even go down it. My dad still tells this story to this day. I remember the times when I finally became brave enough to face attractions that had once scared me. These moments made me feel like a hero, like the heroes in the Disney movies I grew up watching. And these moments used to exist all over the parks. The alien reaching for you in the Great Movie Ride, getting attacked on Star Tours, being stalked by the evil queen on Snow White's Scary Adventures, seeing the Yeti almost grab you on Expedition Everest before I learned what B mode was. Literally all of Dinosaur, another ride that I conquered for the first time on my 2023 trip. I'd technically ridden it countless times, but I don't think riding it with my eyes closed and ears covered counts. Even when I went to Disneyland for the first time in 2024, I rode Indiana Jones for the first time. I was terrified of seeing the giant snake, but I did it. These attractions pushed kids just far enough outside their comfort zone to make them feel brave. But when you start to look at some of Disney's newer attractions, that tension is starting to disappear. One of the clearest modern examples might be Tiana's Bayou Adventure. Now let me be clear. Splash Mountain absolutely needed to be rethemed. The source material had obvious problems that Disney needed to address. But what made the original ride work was its story structure. Throughout Splash Mountain, Briar Rabbit is constantly being chased by Briar Fox and Briar Bear. The ride builds tension until the moment he's finally caught and thrown into the Briar Patch. The massive drop represents him escaping. The danger is part of the story. But in Tiana's Bayou Adventure, the story is much lower stakes. Tiana is preparing for a party and she needs to find musicians. This is a very pleasant premise, but maybe not the level of urgency that leads to a 50-foot drop. There's no villain. Mama Odie makes you small halfway through the ride just 'cause. You aren't hiding or escaping from anyone. There's no real threat. And as a result, the massive drop in the ride doesn't really have a narrative purpose anymore. It just sort of happens. Imagineering was reportedly instructed to avoid references to voodoo, which also meant the ride avoids including Dr. Facilier, the main villain from The Princess and the Frog, altogether. And while that decision may have come from a good place, removing the villain also removes the conflict. Without conflict, the ride just becomes less of a story and more of a tour through the bayou. And that's exactly the kind of change that makes modern Disney attractions feel a little less exciting. But Disney didn't just build rides for kids to conquer. They also built rides specifically to appeal to teenagers. One of the biggest examples of that is Rock and Roller Coaster. Aerosmith being removed was inevitable. I'm honestly kind of shocked that it didn't happen sooner. But the bigger question isn't why Aerosmith is leaving, it's what replaces them. Because Rock and Roller Coaster exists for a very specific reason. When Michael Eisner was running Disney in the 90s, he realized the parks had a problem. Teenagers, especially teenage boys. They didn't feel like Disney was built for them. So, he started introducing more intense attractions: Tower of Terror, Indiana Jones, and Rock and Roller Coaster. The ride was designed specifically to appeal to teenagers. When I was a kid, I always assumed if Aerosmith was replaced, it would be with something like Hannah Montana and just make the guitar purple. But as I got older, I started thinking someone like Olivia Rodrigo would actually make perfect sense. She has the right audience, the right energy, and enough music to completely carry the soundtrack of the ride. Then, Disney announced the replacement, the Muppets. And honestly, when I first heard this, I held out hope. The original Muppet Show was famous for its celebrity guest stars, so the idea seemed perfect. Use the Muppets as hosts and rotate the celebrity musicians. That way, when an artist stops being culturally relevant, Disney could simply swap them out and update the ride's soundtrack. But with the quick turnaround Disney announced, I'm not very optimistic that's what we're getting. Right now, it sounds like we might just be listening to a Muppet song during the ride, and that worries me a little. The Muppets appeal strongly to millennials and older generations, but Gen Z and Gen Alpha don't really have the same relationship with them. For a ride that was originally built to appeal to teenagers, that feels like a strange direction to go in. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying Disney should go full thrill park. That's Universal's lane, and it's good for Disney to have a separation there. But I do think Disney might be underestimating the long term impact of removing these moments from their parks. Sure, a guest might say an attraction was too scary for their kid on a survey the next day, but years later, that bad experience might actually become that kid's favorite Disney memory. And when Disney announced their upcoming Villains Land, I was really hoping we might see a ride that leaned into that idea again. Maybe even a coaster that rivaled Rock and Roller Coaster. Something intense, something memorable, something kids might be a little afraid of, but proud of themselves for riding. Without this, the land just becomes Fantasyland with the lights off. If the rumor is true that Imagineers were told to think more Isle of Berk instead of Dark Universe, that would greatly disappoint me. Because Walt Disney didn't design Disneyland to only be a place for kids to have fun. He designed it to be a place for the entire family. And if Disney removes these moments of fear and triumph completely, they run the risk of confirming the false notion that Disney parks are only a place for kids to have fun, and they might lose something that made the parks magical in the first place. Some of the most magical moments at Disney happen when you're just a little bit scared. And honestly, if Disney completely removes that feeling, the scariest thing left in the parks for older crowds might just be the price of a lightning lane. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out the channel a lot. And thank you for watching the first episode of Compulsive Criticism.